Nate Diaz is notorious for his pace and his pressure and his ability to tire out his opponents. And one of the ways he does this is through his extremely effective clinch game. So let's break it down. So against Anthony Pettis, Diaz used the clinch a lot. Here we see him use a right hook to eventually duck down into the clinch, where he has an underhook and he's sort of framing with his forearm, which he uses to pummel through another underhook and then switches it to an overhook. Nate Diaz constantly pummels in the clinch, and all while he's doing this, he'll be, just doing little tapping shots. That's one of the ways he gets such high volume. And those little tapping punches, while they may not do a lot of damage, they're annoying and they help pummel through underhooks. Nate usually uses an overhook to hoist up the opponent in whatever direction he wants them going. He uses the underhook for a similar thing, and because Nate is so tall, he's usually taller than most of his opponents, he will use underhooks to sort of get the opponent standing on their toes, as you see he does with Pettis. He then hoists Pettis over with, I believe, an underhook, and uses his other hand to frame and land a nice knee to the face. Again, Nate throws a right hook, but with most of his clinch entries, he doesn't just straight up enter the clinch. He'll get in range and then he'll start pummeling through arms. So he pummels in, right? And normally when he has his opponent hoisted over with an underhook or an overhook, he'll start kneeing the thigh, or at least against Pettis, he kneed the legs quite a lot. Then you see him start controlling the wrist. He is really, really good at this because it's a lot easier to control the wrist than like larger parts of the body. So he controls the wrist, that opens up the body, and Diaz lands a nice right knee to the body. Here we see Nate in the clinch landing a knee to the thigh again, and he does this, again, like I said, quite a lot. But what I really want you guys to focus on is how Nate's leaning into the clinch. He is really putting all of his weight, and he's trying to hang over Pettis. He's really just making him bear his weight. Now, Diaz will often punch into the clinch and kind of mix it up between grabbing and just striking, because the way he throws his punches, they're arm punches, right? So it kind of confuses the opponent on whether or not they're about to enter a clinch or they're just going to get their face popped back by a jab. And in this case, Diaz lands a jab, then gets a collar tie, and he controls the wrist. He then pulls that off and he generates a lot of power with this right knee that he lands, just mixing up the strikes and mixing up the ranges to confuse the opponent, not just exhausting them physically, but also mentally. Diaz starts to put a lot of volume on Pettis, and he's trying to bait out a counter. Pettis obviously goes for a big right hand. Diaz ducks under it, gets an underhook, and circles around to the back. Right, and since they're against the fence, and Pettis doesn't want to get his back taken, he starts shifting his hip into the fence, but this opens him up for a knee, and Diaz lands a nice right knee straight to the face, which sits Pettis down, partly because Pettis was trying to break the grip on the body lock, but also because he just got kneed in the face. Like, come on, guys. As Pettis begins to get up, Diaz immediately goes for like a front headlock, and he pulls his hips back and loads up a nice knee to the face. The way that Diaz is throwing these knees, he generates quite a lot of leverage on them. He's pointing the toes and everything, just pitch perfect stuff. He then goes back against the fence. He's controlling the wrist with his left hand. He pulls out his right underhook and just swings through a massive elbow as Anthony's hands are focused on trying to peel away Nate's grip on his wrist. So he lands a massive elbow, and it actually does shake the cage quite a bit. When watching it live, it's actually very cool to watch, but impressive clinch work by Nate. Diaz then hoists Pettis up with the underhook and starts throwing him over to Nate's left, and he's controlling Pettis' wrist. This opens up the body. Nate's able to land a good knee. Pettis then starts trying to peel off the wrist grip as it's giving him problems. Nate, again, slides in an elbow as both of Pettis' hands are occupied, just rinse and repeating the same concepts in the clinch and having great success with them. And here we see all the reads that Diaz has built throughout this fight really come into play. He's striking, doing short hooks and uppercuts. He's striking a little bit of range and blending it into the clinch. So Pettis just simply does not know what to do while he's getting hit, and Nate's upping, the power in his strikes. And he starts committing heavy to the collar tie and the wrist control, and then switching back to strikes as he's having the most success with the collar tie and the wrist control, as it allows him to land knees. He starts going knees to the body, knees to the head, good punches. This is just where he starts overwhelming Pettis. It's not much technique. It's nothing too specific. It's just concepts and principles that are done well. Here, Nate slips on the inside of Pettis' jab, gets a collar tie, and immediately starts controlling the wrist as he's moving his head. Just pretty impressive stuff, and he pushes Pettis against the fence. They then start exchanging. Diaz is throwing punches even in ranges where Pettis thinks they're going to clinch. Then, eventually, Pettis starts to throw a spinning back fist. Diaz smothers this, uses head control to land a nice knee to the face. Pettis is hurt by this. He turns around, lands another knee, punch down the middle, and drops Pettis. Now, against Conor McGregor, he uses a bit of a different strategy, as on the feet and at range, Nate was kind of getting outstruck. So he off-balances Conor with a slap. Conor goes stumbling against the fence. Diaz charges in and lands a nice elbow. And while he's in close range with Conor, instead of trying to grab, he just immediately starts going for punches. As he sees that he's not going to get Conor out of there, he starts bearing his weight on him. As Conor is visibly exhausted, Nate's goal is to either just keep punching or, again, try to drain him, zap him of his energy, and just pummel through underhooks, change around the position, or while landing a massive volume of punches. You don't really see him control the wrist as much in this fight, as he uses his left hand to block the left knee of Conor, but he does rely quite a lot on collar ties just to zap the energy from Conor's neck and just muck with his ability to move his head and just, have energy. Because collar ties and just having someone's weight on you is exhausting. As Conor is quite literally running away from Nate on the feet, Nate starts getting more confident with his boxing at range, lands a long left straight, ducks into the clinch, and just starts making Conor bear his weight. They break away from the clinch. Conor tries to throw a spinning back kick. Nate smothers it, catches it, grabs the single leg, and enters the clinch, to where he just starts wrenching, putting his weight on Conor, landing large amounts of punches. He really focuses on harassing and overloading Conor's system more than he does Pettis, because Conor at this point has put so much energy into trying to knock out Nate that there is just nothing left of the tank at that moment. You'll see this a few times with Nate's clinch entries. He'll start throwing long punches to the head. He'll then commit with like a jab or a left straight to the body to get the opponent's hands down, and then he'll enter with double collar ties, which he does against Conor. He rinse and repeats the same strategy, but what he starts doing now as Conor's getting more tired, the fight's getting slower, the fight's getting more fast for Nate and slower for Conor, is he has the collar tie, and then instead of framing on the knee, Nate starts grabbing Conor's left wrist while punching him with his right hand. And he's not always grabbing the wrist, sometimes he's just framing against Conor's arm, but it's just preventing Conor from even pummeling underhooks or overhooks, and he is just drowning Conor. He also starts to, use the collar ties to land some massive knees as well that Conor just eats. Now we're going a bit further back when Nate Diaz fought Donald Cerrone. Nate throws a left straight which misses. He uses that and turns it into a left collar tie and chucks Cerrone over. He then starts literally with one hand, just with his right hand, pushing Cerrone against the fence, just literally just having his way with him. He then starts ripping punches to the body, he grabs again, and he starts landing knees, just overwhelming Cerrone, who traditionally likes space, likes room to work, needs room to kick, that sort of thing. And beating Cerrone in the clinch like this is pretty impressive, because at the time, Cerrone was the Muay Thai guy in the lightweight division. Now, since Cerrone doesn't move his head at all, what Nate would do is literally just grab Cerrone's head and pull it down just to annoy him and just to exhaust him, because I've said this many times, getting collar tied is exhausting, and if the collar tie is right there for Nate. And what he'd also do is he'd, pull Cerrone's head down, and Cerrone would immediately spring his head back up, and Nate would start landing punches as his head just shot back up on a straight line. Here Nate uses the collar tie to knee Cerrone, as Cerrone doesn't really have much footwork or head movement to actually shake off the collar tie. Here Cerrone is actually able to frame off on one of the clinch entries, and you see he starts to load up a kick. Nate, however, throws a teep and sits Cerrone right on his ass. Not entirely related to the clinch, but just kind of funny. Diaz goes to grab both of Cerrone's wrists, and he folds a right elbow over the top, something that Jon Jones often does. The end.